If you're sitting bored in your cab all day and you need something to get you through your day, check out Sweat and Grime on any of your podcasting platforms. We geared it to be entertaining and focused on the trades. We're not trying to teach you anything. We're not trying to get you to have a phenomenal working business. We just want you to have a good time. So check us out, Sweat and Grime, on any of your podcasting platforms. We appreciate it. Now, here's your video. Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today's Down and Dirty is a question from you guys. It's how do you price a basement dig? Well, that's a hard question to just answer super quick because there are a number of ways that you can go about this. Overall, at the end of the day, as a business owner, what you have to do, and this is with any sort of dirt work, it's not just basements, is we have to think about what all of our costs are, what it's going to take for materials to do that job, and then we have to make money off of it, obviously. And that's kind of the basics of what we're going to do to figure out how much we're going to charge to dig a basement. So there are a lot of factors in play. A basement in particular is kind of a difficult one because there's so many factors. What kind of material are you digging in? That's going to make a huge difference because if I'm digging in beautiful clay, that's not the really hard, sticky clay. Blue clay, if you guys are in the industry, you've probably heard of blue clay. It's miserable to dig in because it's so sticky, it's hard, it's very difficult, your machine struggles. That's gonna make for a more difficult dig than if we got into some like regular brown clay that's really easy to dig through, but it holds the wall shape really well. We can dig a nice, tidy hole. The walls are gonna hold up. We're not gonna have any sort of over dig that we really need to get into aggressively, so we can dig a really nice basement. Well, what if it's sand? Well, now all of a sudden I'm having to slope this whole hole back. So I may add 30% volume to the amount of dirt that's coming out of the hole, and I need to account for that. If it's shale, guess what? Now I've got more rocky conditions that I'm fighting through. And there's two things there. One, you're gonna have more cave-ins because as you kind of scratch the sides of your trench, it's gonna undermine a little bit, and you might have some cave-ins that you have to deal with. More importantly, you're gonna have at least a layer, if not the whole dig, where you're scratching through shale and you're not digging super efficiently. So right there, as a contractor, you kind of have to take the big picture view of how difficult is this dig going to be? Then we need to start thinking about external factors. Is all of the dirt staying on site, or are we gonna haul that dirt off? If we're hauling it off, are we doing it ourselves with our truck, or are we paying a trucking company? And what are those trucking rates gonna look like? So you can already start to see kind of where we're going with this. So if I were gonna go out and bid a basement dig, let's say it's a 40 by 60 basement and we're digging a rough depth of about 8 feet. Because if you think about a standard 9 or 10 foot basement wall, you're generally gonna have that stick out of the ground about 1.5 to 2 feet. So we only really need to dig down about 8 feet deep. So I know that we can comfortably complete a dig like that in about an 6 to 8 hour day, depending on conditions. Now again, this is in Michigan where I know our soils, but it's also Michigan in the sense that there is some questionability there. There's some variability in the kind of soil I'm gonna get into. So before I put a price on this, Rick and I are gonna go visit that site and we're gonna get a feel for what the ground conditions are like. And this doesn't require digging a hole. Most of the time, we're familiar enough with our area that we can kind of take a look at the ground and the topsoil and we can get a decent feel for what we're gonna get into. Water's another huge factor. Where's the water table at? See if you have a perk test on file that you can take a look at to see if there was any water and where that water table is at. Because if you have water inflow and you're gonna have to do pumping, you need to take that into account. So if we're gonna do a 40 by 60 by 8 foot deep basement dig, Rick and I can knock that out, like I said, in 6 to 8 hours. So we need to do some thinking here. We're probably gonna rent a machine because the way Rick and I run our business, we don't have a 20-ton excavator sitting around because of the variability of work we do. That's just our business model. So we're gonna go rent a machine. Fair warning, these are not real numbers. I don't want you to use my numbers because this is something you need to go do yourself. I'm just gonna slap some numbers out there. We're gonna say that machine rental is gonna cost us $1,500 for the day. Now, that's not delivered, is it? That's a critical question you've got to think about, is mobilization. If you're using your own equipment, You're gonna have a mobilization fee. You should have a mobilization fee. If you don't, change that tomorrow, now. You need to be charging for mobilization. If it's gonna be delivered from the rental company, well, we'll call that's gonna be 500 bucks, but that's both to and from the shop. So 500 bucks is gonna cover all of my trucking for that machine. Now, fuel. I don't know, fuel burn over the course of the day. I'm probably in a 20-ton excavator. I'm gonna burn probably, let's just call it $120 worth of fuel. Now, maintenance, this isn't my machine, so I don't need to worry about maintenance. But if it's your machine, you do need to worry about maintenance. And I'm not just talking about oil changes. I'm talking about you need to take, if you're gonna hold on to this machine and do an undercarriage replacement, you need to kind of amortize that out over all of the hours you think you're gonna need. You can run the machine before you need it. So if we can get 2,500 hours out of an undercarriage replacement, and the undercarriage replacement is going to be $40,000. You need to divide that $40,000 among your 2,000 hours or 2,500 hours, and that maintenance cost needs to go into every single bid that you do, because we need to account for that. Same with oil changes, same with final drive fluids. You need to think about all of your overall maintenance costs, and you need to be factoring that into your bids, because if you don't, guess what happens when 2,500 hours comes around? You're scrambling to try to come up with 40 grand for an undercarriage replacement, plus all these other bills that you've had stacking up because you aren't billing for that expense. So make sure you're taking that into account. So again, coming back to this scenario, I don't have to worry about that because it's not my machine. Now, another thing you're going to want to know is your hourly wage, because generally when you're digging a basement, you're not just out there by yourself. So what are we paying your laborer? Let's call it $20 an hour. He's a new guy. He's going to be out there for 8 hours. So 160 bucks. Now, again, not real numbers, because you have to take into account that you're paying him 20 bucks an hour, but then you have taxes and all of that stuff, call it another 20%. I'm not going to do all the complicated math here. It's the concept that's important. You need to know what your cost is on that laborer for 8 hours. For the sake of easiness for today, we're going to call it 160 bucks. Now, you need to pay yourself, right? You don't work for free. This is what most new business owners always forget. Pay yourself, and it needs to be what you want to make. I'm sorry, but my time is worth 80 bucks an hour, and I'm going to be out there for 8 hours. That's 640 bucks. And I'm worth it. That's right. Watch yourself. Now, that's kind of my cost. That's my rough costs here. Now, we probably got some small costs like batteries for the laser, maybe a grade rod and everything. So you could kind of get nitpicky on this, and you could throw in an extra 20 or 30 bucks. Now, another thing a lot of guys don't take into account is all of their overhead. So let's think about it. We're running a company. We've got a dump truck probably. We've got a trailer. We've got several pieces of equipment. We have to carry insurance. We have to pay for our QuickBooks subscription. We have to pay for paper for the printer. We have all these other expenses. That's where it's helpful to have an already running business that you can kind of go back through your books and figure out what, and this is all what we call overhead, by the way. This is the cost to just keep the doors open to your company. And it's nice to be able to go through the history of your company and kind of get those, but instead what we can do is just kind of at a high level go, it's costing us $100 a month for electricity. Our insurance was $3,000 for the year. We've got printer ink costs. We've got our QuickBooks subscription. That's, $60 a month or whatever. Kind of get a rough idea of what your overhead is and multiply it out for the year. And then we'll say, kind of dwell that down into how many hours a year are you working. If we're working 1,200 hours a year, divide your overhead cost by the 1,200 hours. And now you can factor that in. And again, we're not going to get into the super ultra details of the math, but we're going to call that, let's call that $1,000 a month to keep our doors open. So if we add all of these expenses together, I'm sitting at $3,920 in cost for me to show up and dig this basement. Now, that's cool. What if we double that? And so we're going to charge someone, call it $7,500. Let's just do that. $7,500 to dig this basement. Whew. Okay, we're in good shape. I've covered all of my costs. I've roughly doubled that so that I'm making a 50% margin. Now this is where, and Rick and I do this all the time, we kind of will bid out a job and you kind of get bogged down in the numbers and you're like, by God, I found my number. But then you need to kind of take a step back and go, is $7,500 a realistic number for getting a basement dug? If I were a customer and I'm looking to get someone to dig my basement, is $7,500 realistically in the industry that we're in what I would expect to pay? Well, no, you're probably in our neck of the woods. You're probably closer to 15 to 20,000, depending on the size of the basement. And so there's this aspect where you kind of have to step back and go reality check. And that's kind of the big thing I want to talk about. It's one thing to put numbers on paper. It's a whole other thing to kind of get back into the reality check view of, am I too high or am I too low? Is this a reasonable gut check number for the work that I'm about to do? And this is where I would encourage new guys in the industry, do the gut check. So Rick and I will actually do this. We actually kind of get our head out of the numbers because you're so bogged down. And then we will kind of do the gut check. Hey, does this seem like a good number to charge for this? And sometimes you might be a little high. Sometimes you go, hey, that 50% margin on this one, we ain't gonna be able to swing that. It doesn't make sense. So we're gonna have to drop it down to like a 20% margin. But there's other jobs where you might turn around and go, look, because of our skill set, because of the way we're equipped, we're able to get in and do this job for a 60% margin because that's just the way we're tooled. And right there answers one of the key questions that I got is, how can some people charge $3,000 for this service and other people want $9,000? Right there is the answer to that question. It all depends on how you're tooled and how you're set up. But that's why it's so important to do that gut check, is because it's very easy to get whittled down in your numbers. And next thing you know, you're digging a basement for $6,500 because, wow, that's a 50% margin. And it wasn't until you actually gave that number to the builder that you turned around and went, why did I do that? I could have gotten 12 grand for that basement. Exactly. You're leaving money on the table. The flip side's also true. You may get so bogged down in the numbers. You're like, by God, that $20,000 for that basement is spot on with my numbers for a 50% margin. And that's worked on all the other basements. And then you send that number off and you're perplexed because you didn't get the job. And then you go, who in their right mind is going to pay $20,000 to dig that basement? So this is where you there is the pen and paper aspect of this that we go through and we calculate all our costs and we really dial in what our number is to go do that work and then put a margin on it. But there's also the gut check. And that's where you kind of get your head out of the numbers and you look at it from a high level. Now this is one way to bid a job. You can also take your operating costs and everything we just lined out, and you could flip the script and you could turn this into a square foot price. We could easily take this, if it was $3,900 in cost, this was a 40 by 60 basement, which means that's 2,400 square foot. And then you've got an 8-foot dig. We could do that math. We could figure out our cubic foot, or you might just do squared foot. That would be easier. So if that's a 2,400 square foot and we've got roughly $4,000 in costs, I'm sorry, this is where I can't do math real time in the air. It's not going to happen. But you could get that down to a square foot price. And once you've done a handful of basements and you really get that dialed in, now you can comfortably just rattle off a square foot price. So if someone wants a 3,600 square foot basement, no problem. That's $1.75 a square foot. Real quick, back of the envelope, it's going to cost you X to dig the basement. So there are different ways that you can come at this, and that's kind of what this video is really intended to show, is there's not just one way to skin a cat, and it's really difficult to just kind of toss a number out there on what it would cost. You have to take all of these variables into account, because there's also the variable of, are you getting the backfill in the driveway and the finish grade? Well, you might knock a little off of this to entice the builder to give you the whole package, knowing that overall you're going to make more money. Or you might have a builder that only brings you in to do the basement and it's a pain. You don't necessarily want to do it, so you may bump that number up a little bit because you want to make it worth your time. These are all factors that come into bidding something as simple as a basement dig. So as always, I hope this helps you guys out in the field. We'll catch you on the next Down and Dirty.